On my wedding day, I saw my husband's girlfriend standing at the back of the ballroom. Maya Reed didn't have an invitation. She didn't have flowers. She was wearing a simple black dress, and from the mezzanine above the ballroom, I could see her staring at the stage where Julian Whitmore and I were supposed to get married in less than 10 minutes. Ethan Cole followed my eyes. "Do you want me to have security walk her out?" "No, I set my champagne flute on the railing. She's not the problem." He looked at me, but he didn't ask the obvious question. "Your future husband has been dating that woman for 3 years. How is she not the problem?" "Because I wasn't marrying Julian for love. My father, Richard Bennett, needed the Whitmore family to keep backing him on the board of Bennett Holdings. More importantly, he needed our marriage to put me back where he thought I belonged, useful, respectable, and safely out of the succession fight. He thought Julian would be a dependable political ally. He thought I'd get a beautiful wedding, a powerful last name, and eventually lose interest in challenging my younger brother Ryan for control of the company. What my father didn't know is that Julian and I had made our own deal. A month before the wedding, outside the prenup our families had negotiated, Julian and I signed a private voting agreement with only our attorneys in the room. The Whitmores had invested in Bennett Holdings decades earlier. Julian personally controlled 6% of the voting shares. Under our agreement, if the marriage lasted 24 months, he would give me an irrevocable proxy over those shares. If we divorced a day early, the deal disappeared. Julian needed 2 years to get through restrictions in his family trust and gain enough assets and voting rights to stop living under his father's thumb. I needed 6% to break mine. So we made a trade. "The planner's looking for you," Ethan said. I turned around. He was already holding my veil. That was Ethan. 7 years earlier, he joined my company as an executive assistant fresh out of business school. By the time I got married, he was my chief of staff. He knew my calendar, my medication, which investors I hated taking calls from, what I ordered when I forgot to eat, and exactly how long I could wear heels before I started pretending my feet didn't hurt. Ethan had already run interference for me 3 times that morning. He moved a lender who wanted 5 quick minutes to the following week, made sure my father never got me alone before the ceremony, and replaced the champagne in my hand with sparkling water after 1 glass because he knew I hadn't eaten enough. When the photographer asked me to hold still, I started smoothing the cuff of my sleeve. Ethan noticed. "You're doing that thing." "What thing?" "The thing where you pretend you're not nervous by attacking your clothing." "I'm not nervous." "Then your sleeve has done something unforgivable." I stopped. He held out a protein bar he had somehow produced from inside his jacket. "No. You haven't eaten since 6. I'm wearing a fitted dress. You're also about to spend 90 minutes smiling at people you dislike. Pick your problem." I took the bar. That was what 7 years with Ethan looked like. Not grand declarations. 1,000 tiny corrections made before I had to ask. By then I barely noticed how often I reached for something and found that he had already put it in my hand. I reached out and hooked a finger through his tie, pulling him half a step closer. "You seem awfully eager to deliver me to another man." His shoulders went rigid. "I'm not." "You're not what?" He looked down. I let go and smiled. "You know, Cole, for a man who negotiates for a living, you are terrible at saying what you want." His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. At the time, I thought silence was just one more thing I understood about him. I didn't know yet that even people who are good at staying can eventually decide to leave. The wedding felt less like a wedding and more like a shareholder reception with flowers. There were family friends, private equity partners, attorneys, lenders, 2 independent directors from Bennett Holdings, and at least 4 people who had probably been invited because someone needed their vote before the end of the year. Julian looked handsome, expensive, and deeply unimpressed by the entire institution of marriage. When we stood at the altar, I leaned toward him without moving my smile. "Try to look happy." "I am happy. You look like you're waiting for a biopsy result." His mouth twitched. "That better?" "Much." When the officiant told him he could kiss the bride, Julian hesitated. Only half a second, but I felt it. So I lifted my bouquet, blocked the view of most of the ballroom, and kissed the corner of his mouth. People applauded. Over his shoulder, I saw Ethan standing in the shadows behind the side curtain. He looked away before I could read his face. After the reception, Julian loosened his tie and told me he was going to find Maya. She shouldn't have come, he said. Of course she came. Her boyfriend married someone else today. Don't make fun of her. I'm not. I slipped off one earring. And relax. I'm not trying to steal your girlfriend. He stared at me. Our rules are simple, I said. You handle your relationship. I handle my family. Neither one of us lets our private life blow up the deal. And if one of us does, then the other one gets very expensive attorneys. That earned me an actual laugh. That was our wedding night. No passion. No betrayal. No broken promises. Just a contract, a deadline, and two people trying to buy back their own lives. For the first month, Julian and I were surprisingly good roommates for two people who had no intention of becoming a real couple. We kept separate bedrooms and separate lives. The kitchen after midnight was the one place we regularly crossed paths. One night, I found him making pasta while Maya's name glowed on his phone. My father wants us at the Whitmore Foundation dinner next Thursday, he said. Mine wants us at the Bennett Museum benefit the same night. Julian looked over the pan. Can we fake a small marital crisis? Too early. People would enjoy it. He laughed. Once we stopped pretending our marriage was emotional, we got along. But whenever Maya called, his face changed. He became more awake. More himself. I had never done that to him, and he had never done it to me. That should have told me something. The next morning, my father called me to his townhouse on the Upper East Side. His study looked exactly the same as it had when I was 16. Dark wood, leather chairs nobody was comfortable sitting in, and framed magazine covers that always managed to include his face. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was my new assignment at Bennett Holdings, a regional division that had lost money for 3 straight years. You turn this around, he said, and we'll revisit a broader role. I flipped through the pages. Ryan had gone straight from business school into corporate strategy. By 31, he was chief operating officer and the unofficial heir to the company. I had built my own firm, raised outside capital, survived a near bankruptcy during my second year, and eventually sold a majority stake at a valuation my father had publicly called surprisingly respectable. Now I was being handed a cleanup job nobody else wanted. Ryan has been in the succession plan for years, my father said. You chose to leave the company. I chose to build something you couldn't take away from me. His expression hardened. You're married now. You have your own company. There is no reason to turn succession into a war between you and your brother. I'm not at war with Ryan. I closed the folder. I'm just curious whether the audit committee will still think he should be CEO after they see the vendor kickbacks. For the first time that morning, my father stopped looking bored. What are you talking about? Independent audit starts Monday. Claire. I'll take the division. I stood. And I'll take the audit. Downstairs, Julian was sitting in my mother's living room with an old photo album open on his lap. He pulled out a picture as I walked in. I was 6 years old in it, furious and crying with a scraped knee. Beside me stood a little boy in a navy blazer. Julian looked from the photo to me. That was you. A memory I hadn't touched in years came back all at once. A children's charity event at the New York Public Library. I'd wandered away from my parents and gotten lost in a room full of adults who seemed 10 feet tall. I fell, skinned my knee, and sat behind a display table trying not to cry. Then a boy in a tiny suit crouched in front of me. He asked if I was hurt before he asked who I belonged to. He found a staff member, stayed with me until my mother appeared, and stole an orange cream candy from the dessert table because, according to him, sugar made injuries less serious. I remembered that candy for years. Not because it tasted extraordinary. Because it was one of the first times in my childhood someone noticed I was hurting before asking me to behave. You remember? I asked. Julian smiled. I told my mom I rescued a really angry little girl. That sounds more accurate. A few days later, he sent a glass jar of orange cream candies to my office. His mother had found the old recipe from the caterer. I was holding one when Ethan walked in. "I found it," I said. He looked at the jar, then at the old photo lying beside my laptop. I handed him a candy. "Try it." He took it, but for a second he didn't unwrap it. My eyes moved from the boy in the photograph to Ethan. 7 years earlier, during his interview, I'd noticed him because there was something familiar in his face. Not enough to call it resemblance. Just the eyes. Young Julian had the same open, steady look. I had known that once. Somewhere over 7 years of flights, contracts, all-nighters, bad coffee, and watching Ethan become the person I trusted most, I had stopped thinking about it. Ethan hadn't. "So that's him," he said. "Who?" "The person you were looking for." I laughed softly. I was 6. He unwrapped the candy and put it in his mouth. "Well, a little sour. I think it's perfect." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The candy sat on my desk for the next week. So did the old photograph. Ethan never mentioned either one again. 3 nights later, we were still in the office at 2 in the morning preparing for the audit committee. Everyone else had gone home. Manhattan was black glass outside the windows, and Ethan was cross-legged in one of the conference chairs with his tie off and a legal pad balanced on his knee. "Go home," I said. "You first. I pay you to listen to me. You pay me to stop you from making expensive mistakes. That is not your title." "It should be." I threw a pen at him. He caught it without looking. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then his phone lit up on the table. I caught the name of the managing partner at a well-known M&A advisory firm before he turned the screen over. "You should call him back." "I will." "When?" "When we're not preparing to detonate your brother's career." "That could be months." "Then he'll have to be patient." I should have asked why a firm that handled billion-dollar deals kept calling my chief of staff. I should have asked what kind of work Ethan wanted when he wasn't doing mine. Instead, I slid another file toward him. He took it. That was the pattern between us. He made himself useful. I let usefulness become the language we spoke most fluently. 3 weeks later, Ethan openly disagreed with me in a room full of senior executives. I had planned to send the evidence against Ryan directly to the board. Ethan put his hand on the file before I could slide it across the table. "Not yet." The CFO looked at him like he'd just slapped me. I didn't. "Why?" "If you send it now, your father turns it into a family fight. General counsel calls it an internal personnel dispute, and every director who doesn't want trouble hides behind process." "What do you suggest?" "Have the audit committee hire outside forensic accountants. Let the evidence come from a third party. Then document any attempt to interfere." I studied him. "The M&A advisory firm downtown is trying to hire you again, isn't it?" He paused. "How do you know that?" "Their managing partner called one of my investors for a reference." "That feels invasive." "They're offering you more money than I am." So why are you still here?" He pushed the file back toward me. "I don't want to leave right now." At the time, I heard loyalty. Later I understood there was a difference between someone staying because they had nowhere else to go and someone staying even though they had a door open in front of them. We followed Ethan's plan. The outside forensic team confirmed kickbacks tied to 2 major vendors, inflated procurement contracts, and payments routed through a consulting entity connected to one of Ryan's closest friends. For the first time in his career, my father couldn't make the problem disappear with reputation and a phone call. Independent directors started asking whether Ryan should remain COO at all, much less become CEO. Ryan came to my office on a Tuesday afternoon and shoved past reception hard enough that security had to be called. Ethan stepped between us before Ryan got within 10 feet of my desk. "Was this you?" Ryan shouted. "You had to destroy me just to get a seat at the table?" "If accurate books can destroy you, I'm not the problem." Ryan pointed at Ethan. "And what are you supposed to be? Her pay guard dog?" I laughed. "At least he earns his paycheck." Ryan's face changed. Security grabbed his arm. Before they took him out, he looked at me over his shoulder. "You really think taking my place means you won?" I didn't answer. Ethan watched him until the elevator doors closed. The night everything changed was a Friday. Julian was supposed to pick me up from my Midtown office so we could go to dinner at my parents' place. Halfway uptown, Maya called him. I heard only pieces of the argument. Then she said something clearly enough that even I could hear it through the car speakers. I'm not going to be your secret for 2 years, Julian. I'm not putting my life on hold until you're technically single again. The call ended. Julian immediately called back. No answer. Again. Nothing. He swore under his breath. She's taking her key to the doorman, he said. She's leaving the city. Then you should talk to her. I need to go now. After you drop me off. I'll lose 40 minutes. The car slowed. I turned my head. You're not seriously about to leave me on the side of the road? He looked guilty before he even answered. We're in Midtown. There are hotels, cabs, people everywhere. Call Ethan. I have to fix this. For a second, I remembered the little boy with the orange candy. Memory is dishonest that way. It freezes one bright moment and lets you believe a person is obligated to remain that version of themselves forever. I opened the door. Go. Julian left. Ethan arrived 20 minutes later. He didn't ask why I was standing outside a hotel in evening clothes with my arms folded against the cold. He took one look at me, opened the trunk, and pulled out a gray wrap and a pair of soft slip-on shoes. Change your shoes. I stared at them. Why do you have these in your car? You wore 3-inch heels today, and your mother makes people stand around after dinner for no reason. That is disturbingly specific. It's my job. He crouched to undo the strap around my ankle. I looked down at him. Ethan. Yeah? Do you ever think you know me too well? His hand paused. Occupational hazard. There it was again. The explanation we both used because it was easier than saying anything else. I let him change my shoes. By then, I had become so used to Ethan knowing what I needed that I'd stopped asking whether he was supposed to know forever. On the drive back, I rested my head against the window. Thank you, I said. For the shoes. For coming. His eyes stayed on the road. You called. As if that explained everything. Maybe for us it did. There had been airports where I called him at 3 in the morning because a deal had collapsed. A hospital waiting room when my mother had surgery. A hotel lobby in Chicago after an investor threatened to pull out and I was too angry to trust myself on the phone. Ethan had shown up for all of it. I had shown up for him too, I told myself. I knew his birthday. I knew he hated being congratulated in public. I had promoted him faster than anyone else in my company. I had defended him when older executives called him the assistant, long after he had become the person half of them quietly asked for before making a decision. But standing beside someone and knowing how to receive what they give you are not the same skill. I didn't know that yet. We noticed the first car after we left Manhattan. A black SUV stayed behind us through 2 turns it didn't need to make. Then another one appeared ahead. Ethan changed routes. They changed with us. His entire posture shifted. Call 911. I picked up my phone. Before I finished giving our location, the SUV in front braked hard. Another vehicle came up behind us and boxed us into a construction lane near the river. 4 men got out. One was carrying a metal pry bar. Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt. I grabbed his arm. No. They're here for you. Which is exactly why you're staying in the car. He looked at me. He wasn't scared. That scared me more. Lock the doors, he said. The police are coming. He got out because he thought he could buy time. For a few seconds, he did. Then one of the men swung. The first hit landed across Ethan's shoulder. The second caught his leg. He went down on one knee. Everything inside me went white. I unlocked the door and ran out. Stop. Ethan looked at me like I was the one doing something reckless. Claire, get back in the car. Blood was running from his temple. I stepped between him and the men. How much did Ryan pay you? The man with the pry bar hesitated. That was answer enough. I'll triple it, I said. Walk away. He laughed. Ryan said tell you to drop the audit and stay out of his seat. I laughed back. The company's money isn't his. Neither is the CEO job. Sirens sounded somewhere behind us. The men turned. The last swing came too fast. I only had time to bend over Ethan. The impact hit my back so hard my knees buckled. I barely felt it. Ethan collapsed against me, and his blood soaked through the sleeve of my coat. Stay awake. His eyes fluttered. I didn't protect you. Something in me broke. What else were you supposed to do? I shouted. What else do you think you have to do for me? I had been afraid of failure before. Of losing financing. Of losing my company. Of my father winning. Of spending my entire adult life proving I deserved a seat in a room that had always been prepared for my brother. None of that came close. All I could think was that Ethan might die in my arms. When I woke up in the hospital, Julian was asleep in a chair beside my bed. Ethan? I asked before he was fully awake. Julian stood immediately. Surgery's over. Fracture in his leg, head injury, a lot of bruising. He's stable. I closed my eyes. My lungs finally worked again. Julian sat down. I'm sorry. The attack wasn't your fault. I know. Leaving you alone on the street was. I looked at him. Yes, it was. He nodded. No excuse. No attempt to make himself feel better. Maya ended it, he said after a moment. I wasn't surprised. She said she wouldn't spend 2 years pretending not to exist. She shouldn't have to. I know. That was the first time I understood Julian clearly. He was never my villain. He was simply the wrong man, and he kept proving that we had no business being married to each other. The police connected the attack to Ryan within days. He had used a middleman tied to a private security contractor. The NYPD kept the criminal investigation moving, and the Manhattan District Attorney's Office took the case. No amount of family influence could turn what happened into a private disagreement. My mother still tried. Her first call began with, "Can you tell the prosecutor you don't want them to be aggressive? Ryan's already lost enough." I stared at the hospital wall. Do you know where I am? Silence. The hospital, I said. Your daughter and another person were almost beaten to death because of your son. He's your brother, Claire. And I'm your daughter. Another silence. This one lasted longer. The criminal case and the corporate fight moved on separate tracks. The district attorney decided what Ryan would be charged with. The board decided whether he would ever work at Bennett Holdings again. With the forensic audit, the police evidence, and the audit committee's findings all in front of them, my father finally lost the ability to protect Ryan without risking his own position. Ryan resigned as COO. Part of the family trust voting power my father had planned to place behind him was moved under an independent trustee. Combined with the directors I had already won over, it gave me enough support to join the board and influence the succession plan for the first time in my life. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, the first place I went was Ethan's hospital room. He was awake, sitting up with his leg elevated and a laptop closed beside him. I told him what happened at the board meeting. Congratulations, he said. It's a start. Still, congratulations. Normally, he would have asked what I planned to do next. He would have told me which directors were still uncertain, which committee assignment mattered, what my father would try in response. He said nothing. I looked at him. You have something you want to ask me? He was quiet for a long time. 7 years ago, there were 7 people interviewing for that job. My chest tightened. Why did you choose me? I could have lied. I didn't. The first reason I noticed you was because your eyes reminded me a little of Julian when we were younger. Ethan smiled without humor. So I wasn't imagining it. That's why I noticed you. It's not why I hired you. Why did you hire me? Because the other 6 people were evaluating me while I was evaluating them. They wanted to know whether I was important enough to work for. You were so nervous I thought you were going to hold your resume upside down. His mouth almost moved. Almost. And after that, he asked, What do you mean? You depend on me. You trust me. You let me take care of things you don't let anyone else touch. He swallowed. Is that because I'm me? Or because I fit into a place that already felt familiar? He watched me for a moment before speaking again. Do you remember the first time we came back to New York together after you started the company? I did. We had been 20 minutes from the airport when I asked the driver to take a different route. I said I wanted to see the old neighborhood. You said that. His voice was quiet. Then we sat across the street from a restaurant for almost 15 minutes because Julian was inside. I remembered the rain on the window, Julian laughing at a table with friends, me watching from the back seat because I had not seen him in years. Ethan had been sitting beside me. I didn't know you knew who he was. I found out later. He looked down at the blanket over his injured leg. Then I saw the picture in your office. The candy. The way you looked at him when he remembered you. Ethan. I know I'm not him. He looked back at me. I know that logically. But do you know what it's like to be loved by someone and still wonder whether the part she loves most was borrowed from another man? The word loved landed harder because he had not yet actually said it. I opened my mouth and closed it again. He gave a small, exhausted laugh. That hesitation. That's what I've been living with. I wanted to tell him about 7 years of red-eye flights and terrible takeout. About the night he talked me out of signing a financing deal that would have cost me control of my company. About how I could identify his footsteps in a hallway without looking up. But all of those memories proved that I depended on him. They did not automatically prove that I had seen him clearly. I didn't answer quickly enough. He looked toward the window. If Julian had been the one bleeding in the road that night, would you have been that scared? That question hurt more than the injury in my back. Because I didn't know. I could evaluate a company in an afternoon. I could map voting blocks on a board from memory. I could tell within 10 minutes whether someone across a conference table was bluffing. I had no model for this. I don't know, I said. His face changed. But I know this, I continued. When your blood was on my hands, I stopped caring about the shares. I stopped caring about my father. I stopped caring whether I won anything. I just wanted you alive. He closed his eyes for a second. Claire, that's not the answer I need. I know. I've loved you for years. He had never said it that plainly before. I had always known. Knowing and hearing it were not the same thing. I can't spend the rest of my life using how much you need me as proof that you love me back. And suddenly I saw something about myself I didn't like. I had spent my entire life hating my father for treating my ability, my ambition, and eventually my marriage as resources he was entitled to use. Somewhere along the way, I had done a quieter version of the same thing to Ethan. I assumed he would come when I called. I assumed he would remember my medication. I assumed he would stand between me and whatever was coming. I had turned his devotion into infrastructure. Not because I was cruel. Because it had always been there. You're leaving, I said. When I'm cleared to work, I'm resigning. Because I can't answer you? No. He looked down at his hands. That M&A firm has tried to hire me 3 times. Every time I told myself I didn't want the job. The truth is, I kept thinking you needed me more. He looked back at me. I need to find out who I am when I'm not organizing my entire life around being useful to you. For once, I didn't fight to keep something I wanted. A month later, Ethan left. His handoff file was perfect. Of course it was. For the first time in 7 years, I walked into my office and no one had already moved the meeting I hated, ordered the coffee I would forget to ask for, or left the right briefing notes on the exact side of my desk where I liked them. The office felt larger. It also felt unbearably quiet. The first week without Ethan was mostly irritating. My new chief of staff was excellent. She just wasn't psychic, which I had apparently come to consider a basic job requirement. When she asked what I wanted for lunch, I almost said, Ethan knows. A few days later, I finished a board call and turned toward the right side of my desk to make a comment. No one was there. At home, I found 3 identical phone chargers in a drawer and realized Ethan had put one everywhere I tended to lose them. Absence kept showing up that way, as tiny pieces of information about the life I had been living. I learned to manage my own medication, leave the office before midnight, and order my own coffee. Slowly, I learned the difference between missing what someone did for me and missing the person. I missed the way Ethan challenged me when everyone else was trying to impress me. I missed his ugly laugh. I missed that silence with him had never felt empty. That was harder to explain away. 14 months later, I walked into an acquisition meeting as a director of Bennett Holdings and a member of the strategy committee. The target was a fast-growing fintech company. The room was full of bankers, lawyers, and people who had charged by the hour to tell us things we already knew. Then the lead advisor on the other side walked in. Ethan. For 2 seconds, neither of us moved. He looked almost the same. Same dark hair. Same controlled expression. Same habit of scanning the room before choosing a seat. But everything about the way he occupied space was different. He used to stand half a step behind my right shoulder. Now people waited for him to speak. The meeting was brutal. The first real collision came 20 minutes into the meeting. I pushed a proposed earn-out structure across the table. Ethan read it once. No. The word was so immediate that I almost looked behind me to see who he thought he was talking to. Our banker cleared his throat. I leaned back. No. It protects Bennett if growth slows. It puts almost all of the downside on my client. That is generally what buyers prefer. And sellers generally prefer not to finance your caution. A year earlier, if Ethan thought I was wrong, he would have told me before the meeting. He would have anticipated my argument, drafted 3 alternatives, and stood beside me while I chose one. Now he was across the table protecting someone else from me. I should have hated it. Instead, I felt something close to pride. Then give me a structure that doesn't reward them for missing projections, I said. He turned his laptop toward me. I already did. Of course he had. We spent the next hour tearing the model apart. He challenged my retention assumptions. I forced him to concede that 2 of the founders' revenue forecasts were fantasy. At one point his managing director tried to soften a disagreement, and Ethan calmly said, "She doesn't need it softened. She needs the numbers." I almost smiled. By lunch, we had moved 3 major terms. When everyone stood, one of my bankers leaned toward me. "You two have worked together before?" "Something like that." Across the room, Ethan was laughing with his client. He didn't check whether I needed anything. He didn't scan my face to see if I was tired. He didn't move toward the door when I did. The realization was small and sharp. He really did not belong to me anymore. And for the first time, I understood how unfair it had been that some part of me once thought he did. I loved it. After the meeting, he caught up with me in the hallway. "You're harder to negotiate with now," he said. "You're more annoying. I used to be on your payroll. And now? Now I say what I want." I looked at him. Really looked. Not my chief of staff. Not the man who knew where I kept my medication. Not someone waiting to be needed. Just Ethan. "Why deals?" I asked. "Because I'm good at it." "That's not an answer." "Because I like it." That was. "Why did you take this account?" He smiled. "Because I wanted to see you." He didn't look away this time. "I used to think I had to be useful enough to deserve a place next to you," he said. Then I left, and I realized I have work I like. Friends you've never met. A life that keeps going on days when you don't call me. His smile faded into something softer. "I still love you. But now, if you don't choose me, I'll be hurt. I won't disappear." My throat tightened. "I missed you." It was the first clean answer I had ever given him. His eyes closed for half a second. "I missed you too." Neither of us moved closer. My 24-month agreement with Julian still had 10 months left. And after everything we had done wrong by leaving things undefined, neither Ethan nor I wanted to begin something real inside another gray area. So we waited. Not passively, and not in secret. We had dinner with boundaries clear enough to satisfy our attorneys. We talked about his work, not just mine. I met 2 of his friends. He learned I could remember my medication. Mostly. I learned that asking someone what they wanted was harder than assuming I knew. For the first time, I got to know Ethan outside a crisis. He ran in Central Park and hated every mile. He had friends who knew nothing about Bennett Holdings. He discovered I liked grocery stores late at night because nobody asked me to make decisions there, and that I had started taking pottery classes under my middle name. None of it was dramatic. That was why it mattered. For the first time, our relationship was being built out of choices instead of emergencies. 10 months later, Julian and I signed our final divorce papers with both sets of attorneys present. 24 months. Not one day early. The divorce itself was easy because the prenup had been painfully thorough. The document that mattered was the one that became effective the same day. The irrevocable proxy over Julian's 6% of Bennett Holdings voting shares transferred to me. I signed the last page and exhaled. Julian looked at the stack of documents, then at me. Hello, ex-wife. I held out my hand. Hello, ex-husband. He shook it. You going to see him? Yes. He nodded. I have someone I owe an apology to. I didn't ask who. Whether Maya wanted to see him was her decision. That was their story now. Julian and I separated on the courthouse steps without resentment and without pretending the marriage had been something it wasn't. It had done exactly one useful thing. It gave both of us time to take back our choices. I walked along the Hudson for almost 40 minutes before my feet started hurting. I was still in heels because apparently 2 years of personal growth had not improved my judgment about shoes. I took them off and carried them. A few minutes later, near the river, I stopped. A pair of gray slip-on shoes sat on the pavement in front of me. They were even uglier than the pair Ethan had brought me 2 years earlier. I looked up. He was standing there with his hands in his coat pockets. How did you know I'd come this way? Julian texted me. I stared at him. When did you two become friends? About 15 minutes ago. I laughed. Ethan crouched and placed the shoes near my feet. But he didn't touch me. He looked up. Do you want help? It was such a small question. It almost broke my heart. 2 years earlier, he would have decided for me. 2 years earlier, I would have expected him to. Now he asked. And I finally understood that accepting love should be a choice too. Yes, I said. I do. He smiled and helped me into the shoes. When he stood, his eyes moved to the divorce papers in my hand. Congratulations. On the divorce? On finally getting to choose for yourself. Wind came off the Hudson and lifted my hair across my face. For years, I had remembered the orange cream candy Julian gave me when I was 6. I thought I had been holding on to the boy who once rescued me. I wasn't. A memory of being saved can be bright enough to last a lifetime. That doesn't make it love. The person I couldn't let go of was the man who had seen me ambitious, difficult, terrified, selfish, injured, victorious, and wrong. The man who loved me enough to leave when staying was turning him into someone smaller. He had come back whole. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for anyone to rescue me. I held out my hand. Ethan looked at it. Claire, what exactly is this? Dinner invitation. In what capacity? I pretended to think about it. As the man I chose. His entire face changed. Then he took my hand. I accept.